standing in my sister's living room, surrounded by balloons for her son's first birthday. I watched her raise a glass of champagne 4 days after I buried my husband. "Everyone," she announced, "there's something you need to know." She held up a folded piece of paper. "This baby is my late brother-in-law's son, and I have his will right here. Half of that house belongs to us now." The room gasped. I gripped my glass a little tighter. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Because my sister had no idea what I already knew. If you've ever had someone you trusted smile at you while holding a knife behind their back, you already understand exactly how that moment felt. My name is Everly Grant. I was 34 years old. And 6 months earlier, if you'd asked me to describe my life, I would have painted you a picture straight out of a magazine. My husband, Nathaniel, everyone called him Nate, and I had built something beautiful over 11 years of marriage. Every morning I woke up in our colonial house in Franklin, Tennessee, worth just under $700,000. To the smell of coffee he always started brewing at 6:30 sharp. He kissed my forehead before driving to his office downtown, where he worked as a financial advisor. I headed to my own job as a marketing director. We had our routines, our inside jokes, on Fridays. Nate brought home fresh flowers from the farmer's market. Not because it was expected, but because he knew how much I loved having something alive on our kitchen counter. Friends called us relationship goals. I believed them. There was one shadow, though. After years of trying, 2 rounds of fertility treatment, and 1 miscarriage that nearly broke me, Nate and I had quietly accepted that children might not be part of our story. The extra bedroom stayed an office. We told ourselves we still had each other, and that had to be enough. My younger sister, Paigu, 27 to my 34, had been there through all of it. When she got pregnant the year before, I won't pretend it didn't sting. But Nate and I showed up to every shower. We painted her nursery. When her son, Beckett, was born, she named me godmother, a consolation prize. I accepted gratefully, 2 weeks before everything fell apart. I was organizing Nate's home office while he was on a business trip. That's when I found a credit card statement I'd never seen, in his name, with a balance that made my stomach drop. $450,000. Charges from casinos in Tunica, Mississippi, online betting sites, cash advances, debt consolidation letters, even a notice that used the phrase outstanding obligation to private lender, which, if you know anything about that kind of language, is a nice way of saying someone dangerous is owed money. I didn't confront him. I made copies of everything and put the originals back exactly where I found them. When he called that night from his meeting in Nashville, I told him I loved him, while wondering if he was really in Nashville at all. That was Thursday. By Saturday morning, he was dead. Stay with me here, because this is where the story most people think they know actually begins. The call came at 5:40 in the morning. Officer Dana Reeves from the Mississippi Highway Patrol told me there had been a single vehicle accident. My husband hadn't survived. I sat on the bedroom floor for what felt like an hour. Paige arrived within 30 minutes with her husband, Colton. My parents drove in from 2 hours away. Everyone asked the same question. I couldn't answer what was Nate doing on a highway 3 hours from where he said he'd be. A detective gave me the answer that afternoon. Nate hadn't been in Nashville. He'd been at a casino resort in Tunica since Thursday evening. He fell asleep at the wheel after nearly 2 straight days of gambling. No alcohol. No other vehicles involved. Just exhaustion and desperation. That wasn't even the worst part. Going through his phone, I found messages to women I'd never heard of, using the same words he used to say to me, hotel confirmations for work conferences that never existed. I counted 5 different women over 2 years. One was asking when he planned to leave his wife. Another was thanking him for jewelry. Jewelry I now understood had been bought with maxed out credit. I stood at his funeral in the black dress he'd given me for our anniversary, accepting condolences from people who called him such a wonderful man, while I quietly carried a truth none of them knew: grief and betrayal arriving at your door on the very same week. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but it was about to get so much worse. The night before the funeral, I found a voicemail in his deleted folder that hadn't fully erased. His voice, slurred and panicked, left for a man named Walter Higgins. Walter, it's Nate. I need you to change the will back to Everly before Paige finds out. She's threatening to tell her everything if I don't fix it. I'll handle Paige myself. I played it 3 times. Walter Higgins turned out to be an estate attorney, the same one who had drawn up our original wills years earlier. So when Paige called 4 times insisting I come to Beckett's birthday party, just days after my husband's funeral, something in her voice told me I needed to go and find out exactly what she was planning. At the party, held at her house 40 minutes away, the decorations looked like something out of a wedding magazine. Balloon arches, a professional photographer, a dessert table meant for 50 guests when maybe 20 were expected. Relatives kept exchanging glances and quickly looking away whenever I walked near them. Then I held my godson for the first time in weeks, and my breath caught. His eyes, unusual green with flecks of gold, were Nate's, exactly like Nate's. Beautiful. Isn't he? Paige said beside me, watching my face with something that looked almost like satisfaction. Her husband, Colton, found me alone on the back patio not long after. Everly, we need to talk, he whispered. Not here. Not now. Whatever happens in there, please don't sign anything. Before I could ask what he meant, Paige's voice rang out from inside. Everyone, could you gather in the living room? I have an announcement. And that's when she made the declaration you already read at the top of this story. I know what you're thinking. What kind of person does that at a baby's birthday party? 4 days after a funeral. Tell me in the comments because I still ask myself that question. Paige stood in the center of the room, holding her son, holding up a document with a lawyer's letterhead on it. Walter Higgins' old firm claiming Nate had signed a new will 6 months earlier, leaving her son half of my house. I did not scream. I laughed. A small, disbelieving laugh. Because my sister had just handed me a weapon without realizing it. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend since college. Marisol, now a practicing estate attorney. That will is fake. I have the real one from 2 weeks ago. On my way. Paige, thinking she'd won, kept talking about a secret romance that supposedly began at a 4th of July barbecue. About how Nate had felt trapped by my obsession with having a baby. About how he was finally going to do right by them. Each sentence was aimed at wounding me in front of our entire family. When did you find out you were pregnant? I asked calmly. 2 months after we started seeing each other. He said it was a sign we were meant to be, that God gave him what you never could. Several people gasped at the cruelty of that. Even Paige's own friends looked uncomfortable. Marisol arrived 20 minutes later in a business suit despite it being a Saturday. She examined the will for less than a minute before looking up with a sharp, professional smile. Well, she said, this is interesting. That was the moment the power in the room shifted. Paige thought she delivered a knockout blow. She had no idea she'd just handed me the evidence I needed in front of 20 witnesses. The next morning, Marisol laid out the truth at my dining table. Nate's real will, drawn up 2 weeks before he died. Left everything to me with a handwritten note attached. Times, if anything happens to me, please make sure Everly knows I was trying to fix things. I got in too deep, but I never meant for it to go this far. He'd known he was in danger. The will Paige presented was fake. Walter Higgins hadn't practiced law in 3 years. He'd been disbarred for fraud and was currently serving time for embezzlement. Someone had forged his letterhead and his signature, and the debt was worse than I'd known. $700,000 total, spread across banks in 3 states. Some of it backed by our joint assets without my knowledge. When I called Paige to tell her we knew the will was fraudulent, she didn't deny it. She bragged. I introduced him to that world, you know, through a friend. He wasn't very good at it. So I suggested he make provisions for his son's future before he lost everything. So you admit you blackmailed him. I admit I looked out for my child. Something you couldn't give him. By the way, my own sister. On a recorded line. Admitting to manipulating a grieving man into fraud. If you think that's the ugliest part of this story, keep listening. Through a private investigator hired by Colton, we learned Nate hadn't just been involved with Paige. He'd been drawn into an underground poker circuit connected to a man named Victor Marsh, who was, in polite term, a collector for people you did not want collecting from you. The fake will wasn't romance. It was a scheme to funnel money to pay him off before it turned into something much worse. And then came the detail that changed everything. Going through Nate's home office, I found a leather journal hidden behind a file cabinet. In his own handwriting, going back 2 years, he described his descent into gambling, his affairs, and the truth about Paige. According to Nate, she had pursued him first, at that same 4th of July barbecue, cornering him in the pool house and threatening to expose his gambling if he refused her. But the most devastating entry was from 6 months earlier times. Paige says she's pregnant with my child. But the dates don't add up. We were always careful, because I never told anyone, not even Everly, that I had a vasectomy years ago during our fertility treatments. It's medically impossible for this baby to be mine. She's lying. I don't know how to stop her. A vasectomy. My husband had made that choice alone, in secret. While I was putting my body through years of treatments, trying to give us the child he'd already decided we couldn't have. I sat with that for a long time. Betrayal doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it arrives in layers. And just when you think you've reached the bottom, the floor drops out again. Paige's husband, Colton, had already quietly done his own investigating. He'd had Beckett tested the child was not his. He'd also hired someone to check casino security footage, confirming Paige had been in Tunica with Nate the same weekend he died, leaving hours before the accident. When Marisol subpoenaed Nate's medical records confirming the vasectomy and matched it against a paternity test, the results were undeniable. Nate could not have fathered Beckett. Paige had known that all along, facing an FBI investigation into money laundering, extortion, and fraud. Paige did something none of us expected. She disappeared with her son. 3 days later, at 2 a.m, she called me. I'm tired. Everly. So tired. Please. Just you. No lawyers. No FBI. Beckett's sick, and I don't know what to do. She was hiding at the lake cabin our family used to rent every summer as kids. I drove out alone at dawn, against every warning from Marisol. Because whatever my sister had done, there was a sick child involved, and I couldn't live with turning my back on that. I found her thinner, unrecognizable, rocking a feverish toddler in her arms. We talked until sunrise. She admitted everything: the affair, the blackmail, the fake will, and finally, that she genuinely didn't know who Beckett's biological father was. There had been more than one man that year. Turn yourself in, I told her. Cooperate fully. Get real help. Beckett deserves a mother who isn't running for the rest of her life. That evening, she did. I want to pause here, because I know some of you are furious with me for helping her. I understand. But listening to justice happen and abandoning a sick child in the process are two very different things. Let me know how you'd have handled it. What followed was months of legal proceedings. I won't drag you through in detail. Paige was sentenced to federal time for fraud and financial crimes. Colton, though not biologically related to Beckett, fought for and won custody, with the court ruling that the bond a child has with the parent who shows up every day matters more than DNA. I was named legal co-guardian, given how involved I'd already become in Beckett's daily life. A DNA search eventually connected Beckett to his biological father's family, a young man named Julian who had passed away in an accident of his own before ever learning he had a son. His parents, the Hastings family, entered our lives cautiously, granted supervised visits, slowly becoming another strange, unexpected branch of Beckett's world. Somewhere in the middle of all this, I discovered I was pregnant. Nate and I had frozen embryos from our final round of fertility treatment 2 years earlier. Embryos I'd nearly forgotten about until a storage fee notice arrived in the mail. On impulse, grieving and hoping for something to hold on to, I'd had one transferred. It worked. My daughter, Harper, was born the following spring. Beckett, 3 years old by then, leaned over her bassinet and whispered, "Love you." baby Harper, with a tenderness that undid me completely. Sometimes the family you end up with looks nothing like the one you planned for. And sometimes that turns out to be the point. Paige was released early for good behavior and participation in rehabilitation programs. The sister who came home was quieter, humbler, doing the slow work of earning back trust, one supervised visit at a time. She eventually remarried a man from her recovery group who knew her whole story and chose her anyway. As for Colton and me, two people who had both been betrayed by the same person, who spent years raising two children side by side, sharing school pickups and emergency room visits, and quiet kitchen conversations after bedtime. Something grew between us that neither of us expected, and both of us had been too afraid to name. He proposed on an ordinary Tuesday morning, in the middle of making school lunches, with cereal scattered across the counter and both kids cheering before I even said yes. Beckett, 5 years old by then, had one condition. Can we have dinosaurs at the wedding? And can everyone come? Even the people in Canada. I never imagined my life would look like this. Widowed, remarried to my sister's ex-husband, raising her biological son and my late husband's daughter, born from an embryo frozen before I ever knew the truth about the man I married. It sounds like fiction. I promise you, it wasn't. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: the family you're born into and the family you choose to build are not always the same thing. And that's not a tragedy, it can be a gift. Betrayal nearly destroyed everyone in this story. But what grew back from the wreckage, slowly and imperfectly, turned out to be stronger than what we lost. Have you ever had to rebuild your family after a betrayal like this? How did you find the strength to keep going? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below.